Welcome back, my dear friends. Glad to see you in another episode about Metal Gear series. In the previous episodes we had a chance to slightly scratch games starting from Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 on MSX and Metal Gear Solid on PlayStation 1. If you haven't seen those, I strongly recommend you get familiar with it before watching this episode, because the plot is something Metal Gear series is famous for. For those who already watched those episodes, let's start talking about Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. Well, Kojima achieved a certain success, but he didn't want to create another part of the series every year. But the reason was not only because it was hard to create a high-quality project within 1 year or 2 years. Kojima simply didn't want to do it, although he was asked to do it like thousands of times. In 2000s, Metal Gear Ghost Babel was released for Game Boy Color, and it's the first game that was created without Kojima and received positive feedbacks from both players and critics. At first, this game was supposed to be a port from the first MGS for PS1, but suddenly changed the course and turned into a complete game. Nevertheless, the events of the game do not fit into the official storyline. This year was also famous for two important events: release of PlayStation 2 console, and Kojima showed the first trailer of his new Metal Gear Solid game on E3. And as expected, this one was a blast.
It was incredible. It was unbelievable, mind-blowing. I can't wait.
It's incredible. I've never seen any video game like it before. It was like watching a movie.
Kojima and team did an awesome job. It's reason to buy PlayStation 2 alone, so.
Well, I mean, Metal Gear Solid, a long way from the Nintendo Entertainment System, the 8-bit, the old 1987 system. This is a long way from what it is now. It's incredible. I can't believe this.
For those who haven't heard or maybe a little bit confused, let me explain. Developers of that time only started working with 3D. Of course, there were a lot of projects in 3D, even for original PlayStation console, but if Metal Gear Solid was more like a successful experiment with 3D graphics, MGS2 Sons of Liberty was like a polished and much improved version of the previous game that used all advantages and powers of the new console. It was really a new generation of possibilities and technical improvements in many ways. PlayStation 2 started using DVD discs instead of CD discs that helped to keep more information. 4.5 gigabytes versus 700 megabytes. So developers had to learn how to use potential of the new console properly. High quality textures and videos, scripts, work with audio channels and many other things. I think it's obvious. Besides, developers needed time to fully understand how to work with Emotion Engine, the graphical core of the new console. And MGS2 showed it all in a single game. That was definitely something. Being a huge fan of movies, as you remember, Kojima tried to combine gameplay and cinematic experience, and he totally managed to do it. It touches not only graphics, such as more realistic lights, shadows, physics, and items interactions, but also more advanced AI for NPCs. Plus, this time creators wanted to pay some extra attention to realism of the game, including weapons, armory, and soldiers' behavior. The military consultant who helped to create the first MGS went even further and helped the team mimic the most appropriate behavior. Some minor but extremely important things like how to hold a gun properly, how to move, special signals and signs, etc. In order to understand soldiers' behavior properly, those performances were held right in the Konami corridors. The thing is, Kojima has always been against pre-rendered trailers and scenes, and always uses the engine of the game to show its gameplay. Still, a lot of people had doubts whether the game quality would be present in the final product. Of course, the version that was presented on E3 changed with time, but all mechanics and quality that were shown in the trailer didn't go anywhere. Of course, nowadays we're able to look closer at the game and understand how developers had to improvise in order to save resources and save the quality. Look at the particles that were shown in older teasers and fluidity of the gameplay in general. The resolution of 512x448 with 60 frames per second looked outstanding, especially for such a big game. MGS2 looked like nothing else did. The developers managed to use the whole potential of the console and made the game look gorgeous. In addition, the game used an innovative system of animation, so-called skeletal animation, that allowed to reduce the overall weight of the animations in the game, but at the same time improve the performance. If you ask me, even now MGS2 and the third parts look decent. That's what can be called a competent usage of resources and gorgeous game design. But what Kojima was probably really proud of was that breakup system. Players could see glass that breaks, cupboards that fall apart, and in general almost every small item on the levels could be broken or completely destroyed. If you are even more interested in technical aspects, I strongly recommend you get familiar with the video from Digital Foundry, link in the description. The game improved from perspective of game mechanics as well. A complete and full working system of covers and hideouts could be seen in this game. Not just a chance to sit behind a certain barrel or box or lean onto it, but to peep out, shoot and hide again. Besides, not only a player could take a cover, but enemies as well. In this game also appeared a chance to shoot in first person and hang on the edge of something and knock down some guards by jumping onto them. The combat system was improved as well. Our protagonists learned to capture enemies and use them as a shield, move breathless bodies, check enemies' pockets, attack from a corner, and there is more. In addition to all those features, I would like to point out the music. Starting from the second MGS, the music is written by world-recognized composer Harry Gregson Williams. If you haven't heard of him, this is the person who wrote music for such famous movies and games as The Rock, Shrek, Bridget Jones, The Chronicles of Narnia, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, and many more. All those aspects turned MGS2 into the most expected game of that time. Should I say that after the release in 2001, the fate of its predecessor awaited this game. But for now, let's plunge into history of creation because it was rather complicated at some point. The concept of this game was ready in 1999. The game was supposed to be called Metal Gear Solid 3. This icon symbolizes the 3 highest skyscrapers in Manhattan. It was supposed to start with Snake, who tries to destroy another Metal Gear on an aircraft carrier somewhere in the Middle East. But after the start of development, the situation in the real Middle East was heating up, and it was decided that the tanker would be situated somewhere else. Even at that time, another playable character was planned, known as Raiden, which was described as a ladylike person. Members of his support team were supposed to be called by names of the characters from the book City of Glass, and one of his enemies was supposed to be a certain Chinese guy with acrobatics of Jet Li and a tattoo that could become alive in water. Although this tattoo concept was rejected after all. And his connection with water transformed into abilities to run on water and walls, and were inherited by another charismatic boss. I should point out that a well-known, undoubtedly horrible 9/11 event left an imprint on the whole story in general and on the game in particular. For example, the scene of a falling Statue of Liberty was cut out from the ending. But let's go back to 2001 again. Not long before release of MGS2, Kojima produced anime and a game called Zone of the Enders, with a decent plot and graphics, but this game was sold decently probably because of the demo version of MGS2, which was included. In November, Sons of Liberty was released in the USA and Japan. Other countries had to wait until March of that year. You should know some things about this game. First of all, this is the most commercially viable part in the whole series, since there have been more than 7 million copies sold. And this is the part where all uncertainties started. The first uncertainty for a player was that Raiden character Kojima kept silent about. He didn't show this character to public, and in gameplay trailers he showed only the first part of the game, where Solid Snake was the main character, trying to find evidence of the existence of another Metal Gear. Due to that, many players didn't even have questions about a playable character and were astonished when they saw another one. Nevertheless, I can't imagine how hard it was to keep the main playable character in secret. Besides, even the trailer that was shown in 2001 on E3 presented some fake sequences, which is bad on the one hand, but on the other hand, this was a very bold presentation of the main idea of the game, manipulation of people through information. But we'll talk about it later.
And by the way, Snake, we're changing your code name for all following communication.
What's wrong with Snake?
just a precaution. You are now designated Raiden.
As I've already mentioned, instead of brutal Snake, players received a rather ladylike character. Even local characters get confused by his appearance.
I'm prepared to face the consequences of my betrayal.
What are you... What the...
You're a man?
But if you put aside his appearance, Raiden is a great well-drawn character, just like Snake. He has his own past, his own vision, and his attitude to people, so because of all those positive aspects, most part of the audience accepted this character. But for many players, the problem of this game was not the character, but an extremely complicated and twisted plot. Everybody lies in this game all the time, and there are dozens of plot twists that turn everything upside down. Take into account, this game is approximately from 10 to 12 hours long. All in all, MGS2 has probably the most multi-layered, complex and twisted scenario in game industry. Well, at least one of such scenarios for sure. Some of the players had complaints about controls. The thing is, MGS2 and PlayStation 2 finally learned to use analog sticks, so the only challenge was to get used to those sticks. Funny camera angles that could be found in the previous game were almost gone. Actually, on the contrary, although the camera was fixed, developers made it really good and convenient. Artificial intelligence became much more complex and interactions with soldiers became much more interesting.
What's going on? Respond. Communications with the first floor strata have ceased. Carry out an investigation immediately.
Enemies learned to group up and examine places more carefully, sometimes not given a chance to hide properly. They also learned to notice shadows, hear footsteps and other noises, and report on their current status. If the report wasn't done on time, some additional forces were formed in order to investigate this case, and millions details more. For example, while an enemy was trying to call for help through the radio, you could shoot his radio set to prevent it. There were dozens of new game situations in this game. Search and deactivation of bombs, escort missions, disguise missions, search of a prisoner with cardio stimulator with a remote microphone, and a lot of different activities you could barely find at that time. By the way, a style of walkthrough without any victims appeared first in MGS2. Both Snake and Raiden had a gun with tranquilizer darts. Besides, a sniper rifle could be found in the game with the same mechanics. So almost any enemy could be put to sleep, not killed. All bosses besides health had stamina bar as well, and if you exhaust the boss, he will be defeated without being killed. Of course, it was more difficult to do than just to simply kill. As far as I know, it doesn't give you anything, just a high rank, but it was still fun to do. It's time to retell the plot of the game and share some thoughts about it in general. I have to remind you that I try to compress the plot as hard as I can without missing anything important, but it still can take hours to discuss all aspects of this game. I recommend to continue watching only to people who don't have a chance or desire to play this game. Even the graphics for 2018 looks fine if you ask me, but it's up to you to decide, of course. It's been 2 years since Shadow Moses incident and a lot of things have happened. For example, Natasha Romanenko, a Ukrainian-Russian weapon analyst who took part in the events of Shadow Moses, wrote a book about what happened there, In the Darkness of Shadow Moses, The Unofficial Truth. By the way, the book actually exists, and there are two major consequences. First of all, the whole world finds out about Metal Gear. The data that Ocelot stole in the end of the first part were found on the black market, and now almost every country can create their own Metal Gear based on that data. And the worst part is that almost every financially baked militia can afford to have a nuclear weapon now, and some forces won't think twice before using it. The second thing is that everyone now knows who Snake is and what he did. The hero himself, along with his friend and partner Otacon, became a part of an organization called Philanthropy in order to fight against the black market and walking machines all over the world. Right here and now, they check the lead that on the tanker a brand new model of Metal Gear can be found. During our invasion, the tanker is being captured by Russian military forces. What a surprise, right? And Snake is shot by some flying drone. Its name is Cypher. It's an unmanned aerial vehicle, and it's also a working prototype that was built by rather famous company Sikorsky. And this vehicle works perfectly fine since 1993. The thing is, at that time, not so many people knew about such prototypes and technologies. And just take a look at this. In the game that was released in 2001 were shown unmanned vehicles, or drones as we call them nowadays, and that they would be used in near future. I should point out that Kojima has an eye on such military predictions and technologies, and because of that, his vision of future looks persuasive and authentic in most cases. Well, probably besides huge walking robots, but who knows, right? And the most amazing part is that most of those predictions become true. But let's get back to the tanker that was captured by Russians. Solid Snake is wandering there trying to find another Metal Gear. At first everything goes smoothly. We find our way into the tanker, find out that this operation is controlled by Sergei Gurlukovich, neutralize his white-haired daughter Olga, go deeper into the tanker, take pictures of that metal beast and find out his specification. This model is called Metal Gear Ray and is created to find machines of its own kind. Suddenly, Revolver Ocelot hits the stage, and at first it looks like Sergei and Ocelot work together. But Ocelot betrays Gurlukovich, kills him and demonstrates the transplanted hand of Liquid.
Sergei, looks like you were long overdue for retirement.
I just stop.
It's been a while, brother.
Who are you?
You know who I am.
Liquid?
Ocelot acts weird, but will be able to witness such behavior in future. Then he gets into Metal Gear and sinks the tanker along with Snake. Year 2009, 2 years later after the accident. At the place of a mysterious destruction of the tanker with crude oil, a huge cleaning complex called Big Shell is built. After some time, it's captured by terrorists, and they call themselves Sons of Liberty. Members of anti-terrorist group called Dead Cell also join Sons of Liberty, and the leader of that group is none other than Solid Snake, who supposedly died 2 years ago along with the tanker. This organization keeps around staff of this complex as hostages, around 30 people. And the most important fact is that Mr. President, along with his nuclear briefcase, is one of the hostages. Invaders demand a very big sum of money, $3 billion to be specific. Besides, if terrorists explode the whole place with toxins and oil, this accident will have disastrous consequences for centuries. A new member of Foxhound Squad is sent to investigate this case, codename Raiden.
The terrorists call themselves Sons of Liberty.
Sons of Liberty?
The name of their leader is Solid Snake.
The hero of Shadow Moses? So that's why you changed my code name.
Right, but he can't be the Solid Snake.
He's a part of a new generation of soldiers, which means that his trainings and experience were gained only in virtual reality. But he's young and ready to work. His objective is to save hostages and the president, of course. Also, he has to avoid any damage to the complex to prevent ecological catastrophe. Colonel Campbell takes charge of this mission, and the support team now consists of only one person. Analyst Rosemary, or Rose for short, Jack's girlfriend.
What's going on?
Jack, I'm a part of this mission.
Colonel, what the hell is going on?
Raiden, meet the mission analyst. She'll be overseeing the data saving and support.
Along with Jack, a group of Navy SEALs enters the complex. A bit later, only a few people will survive there. Peter Stillman, who specializes in explosion and bombs, and a certain
Pliskin. Iroquois Pliskin. Lieutenant junior grade.
While Navy SEALs die one after another, the game introduces Vamp to us. Extremely gracious, strong, bloodthirsty and almost invulnerable. And Fortune, and it seems like bullets, missiles and grenades simply veer away from her, although we'll face them later.
What the hell is that?
Vamp was supposed to be a woman at first, but after adding fortune to the plot, this idea was thrown away. According to Yoji Shinkawa, a character mechanical designer, he got inspiration for this character from the image of Joaquin Cortez, a great Spanish flamenco dancer. You can always notice some extraordinary moves while meeting Vamp, like he's dancing on the battlefield. For now, Jake faces a student of Peter Stillman, Fat Man, who manages to lure his teacher into a trap and kill him. Raiden defeats him and finds out that this bomber doesn't know anything about terrorists or demands of money. He's almost all by himself there. Then we meet Cyborg Ninja, almost like Grey Fox. He helps Raiden to find a person who knows where the president is. While he searches, Jack reveals that the leader of those terrorists is not Solid Snake, but Solidus Snake. And the real Solid Snake is that Iroquois Pliskin we saw earlier. It's strange how almost no one paid attention to his appearance, but whatever. By the way, being the clones of Big Boss, it's natural for them to have some resemblance, so there is no surprise that they, Solid and Solidus, share the same 3D model, only some textures were changed. Then, after finding the president, we learn some information about a certain organization called the Patriots, who've been controlling America from the shade for a very long time. And that the president doesn't have any real power. That's why at first he decided to help the terrorists, but changed his mind sometime later.
I don't have any control. The real power is in the Patriots' hands.
The Patriots?
The truth behind this country. I'm not surprised you've never heard of them. Very few are aware of their existence, even among those with code word clearance.
Huh?
Politics, the military, the economy. They control it all. They even choose who becomes president. Putting it simply, the Patriots rule this country.
Then he says that Big Shell is another cover for construction of a new model of Metal Gear, Arsenal Gear. It is a submarine fortress with an enormous firepower, including nuclear weapon and 25 new models of Metal Gear Ray for its protection. But the main danger of Arsenal Gear is something different. There's an incredibly powerful AI on its board called GW. It has everything it needs to censor the whole internet, all sources of digital information. In other words, to erase unwanted information along with all traces of that information and generate new one in order to provide covers for the Patriots and their actions. And Solidus wants to topple the Patriots to make people decide for themselves. Having finished his speech, Mr. President dies from Ocelot's bullet.
No! Good!
That's abusing your right to free speech, Mr. President. Or is it ex-president?
The whole game started from a hint from a certain EE to Otacon where to find another Metal Gear.
Something I have to tell you.
What?
We didn't dig up this info about the new Metal Gear on our own. Not like usual.
How did you find out then?
It was a tip. An anonymous tip.
Anonymous? You've never trusted those. Why would you start now?
I have a younger sister, a stepsister. We have different parents. I only knew her for 2 years.
You've never mentioned her before. So?
The sender of the tip was EE.
EE?
Her name is Emma, but I always call her EE.
Emma Emmerich?
After that, with the help of Emma Emmerich, Otacon's stepsister and the creator of GW, Raiden decides to try to infect the AI with a virus.
I've got this disc that the president gave me. This disc is supposed to contain a virus that can corrupt Arsenal Gear's operating system. We need you to...
This is my program.
What? You actually wrote this virus?
It's not really a virus. It's more like a worm cluster. It's actually a delayed effect autonomous program that's designed to invade GW's cerebrum and render its nerve connections useless.
You know what GW is?
Of course. I created it.
In the process, Emma gets killed by Vamp, and the episode of her death is really touching, especially that parrot sequence. This parrot belonged to Emma, and he was her only friend. They spent a lot of time together, and Emma talked to him a lot. And after her death, Hal could hear the words Emma didn't manage to tell herself.
Hal, I miss you. Hal, I miss you. I miss you. I miss you.
Although the story of two relatives, even not related by blood and who haven't seen each other for a very long time, because of some falling out between them, may sound a bit strange and controversial, especially for those who are not interested or familiar with Japanese culture. But personally for me, this is the scene that really touched my nerve. Our team manages to upload the virus, but only 90% of it. Suddenly that cyber ninja from before appears. It turns out to be Olga Gorlukovich, who was neutralized by Snake before. Raiden wakes up tied up to some torture device in front of Solidus inside Arsenal gear, and right from this moment a complete hell starts to perform. I mean seriously, you have to pay some extra attention here because, as I've already told you, the plot is a complete nightmare from some perspective. I personally played it several times in order to understand what's happening here. First of all, it turns out that Raiden has a fighting experience, and actually a lot of it. Not only in VR. During war in Liberia, he was a unit leader, and he was only 10 years old, and they killed because there was no other way. If you didn't kill, you wouldn't get a meal. If you didn't kill, you wouldn't be allowed to fall asleep. If you didn't kill, you would be killed instead. And at that time, Solidus adopted Jack, became his mentor and almost a father. Here, Olga confesses that she's a double agent of those mysterious Patriots and works for them. I should remind you that we still don't know who Patriots are. Why would she help Jack? In short, to rescue her child. The thing is that Olga's child was taken away from her by the Patriots right after it was born. The only evidence that Olga's child is alive was a monthly picture of her baby from the Patriots. Later, the Patriots injected her child with life-monitoring nanomachines that were supposed to end her life if Raiden fails his mission on Big Shell. So if Olga wanted to save her child, she had to help Raiden complete his mission and help him stay alive. And after those words, she releases Jack. Meanwhile, Colonel Campbell starts to behave very strange.
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
What did you say?
The mission is a failure. Cut the power right now. Infiltrate the enemy fortress, Outer Heaven. Destroy the final weapon, Metal Gear.
Colonel, I just remembered something.
What?
That I've never met you in person. Not once.
And after some time again, we learn that Campbell is not real Campbell. It was GW, that super intelligent computer we spoke before, who spoke to Jack.
But I keep coming back to Arsenal. It isn't a relay point, it's the origin of the signal. And the encryption protocol it uses is exactly the same as that of Arsenal's AI, the so-called GW.
What the hell does this mean?
I think it means you've been talking to an AI.
Here we see some fights afterwards with attempts to break the fourth wall, and in the end of all that, Raiden leaves Snake one-on-one with Fortune. And at this time, Raiden takes the elevator and goes up only to meet a great number of Metal Gear Rays there. Those protect Arsenal gear and are controlled by GW itself. Solidus shows up. At one tough moment, Olga appears and sacrifices herself to save Jack. Or it's better to say, to save her child. Metal Gear Rays start conflicting and attacking each other because of that virus we injected earlier. Suddenly, Ocelot also shows up and says that everything's been planned in order to create a soldier as powerful as Solid Snake. And it means that everyone, every character, every event, and everything were being manipulated in order to lead us to this ending. The project is called S3, Solid Snake Simulation.
Aims and the president's deaths. The ninja. The computer virus that mimics Foxdie. Did you really think they were all a coincidence?
But again, suddenly we find out that Liquid's hand can take control of Ocelot's mind. He says that he wants to topple the Patriots.
I've been waiting for this!
He programs Arsenal Gear to crash into Manhattan, but he escapes the Arsenal Gear in Metal Gear. Solid runs after him. Meanwhile, Arsenal Gear runs towards Manhattan and stops after reaching it. The main danger of Arsenal Gear is that it was capable of destroying the world we know now. Computers, smart devices, internet, the whole economics as we know now could be destroyed in a single blast. And there are only two people left, Solidus and Raiden. Here all the cards are being revealed, explaining the reason for all those actions on Big Shell. As I've already said, it's all been planned. By the Patriots, not Ocelot, Solidus, or anyone else.
The S3 plan does not stand for Solid Snake Simulation. What it does stand for is Selection for Societal Sanity. The S3 is a system for controlling human will and consciousness. S3 is not you, a soldier trained in the image of Solid Snake. It is a method, a protocol that created a circumstance that made you what you are.
If you put it in one sentence, Solidus wanted to find out who the Patriots were, stop them from controlling the world in information, and let people decide for themselves. And to kill them, of course. Ocelot thought that this whole thing had been the project called S3, Solid Snake Simulation, the recreation of Shadow Moses in order to create super soldiers like Solid Snake. He was sure that he even used Dead Cell, Fortune and Vamp as a replacement for Foxhound Squad on Shadow Moses. But everyone's being deceived by the Patriots. S3 project stands for Selection for Societal Sanity, where Patriots try to manipulate minds of people through creating context. And Raiden was chosen as a guinea pig. Of course, when you play this game for the second time, you start to notice some signs of a huge master plan. But after the first walkthrough, you're just sitting there asking yourself, what? I would even add the whole final sequence here, but it's really long. After an epic sword fight, Raiden wins the battle. After the titles, we find this dialogue.
Snake, you there? It's me. I've finished going over that disc.
Did you find the Patriots list?
Of course. It contains the personal data of 12 people. There was a name on it. Snake, it was one of our biggest contributors.
What's going on around here?
I don't know.
Anyway, where are they?
Well, we were right about them being on Manhattan, but...
But what?
They're already dead. All 12 of them.
When did it happen?
Well, about 100 years ago.
What the hell?
Well, that's been the plot of Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. A little bit mind-blowing, in my opinion. Believe me, I understand how silly it sounds that Liquid's hand took control over Ocelot's mind, although there are still discussions considering that fact. I should remind you that this is alternative reality with nanomachines inside people's bodies, some abilities that can be assumed as superpowers because of that, and all that stuff. Questions like how Raiden could realize that Campbell was not real, or that fortune lady who evades bullets without even trying. I understand that it does sound silly, but Kojima wouldn't be such a praised game designer if he didn't think all that through. I'll try to tell you some of the most obvious questions, but again, I strongly recommend you to play this game yourself. First, the hand. There were and are dozens of theories considering the fact of mind control. But the official version and explanation can be found in Metal Gear 4 Guns of the Patriots, where Liquid completely takes over Ocelot and even introduced to players as Liquid Ocelot. I don't want to spoil the joy, and we'll get to that explanation sooner or later. At least that explanation sounds logical and doesn't cause any facepalms. It actually happens rather often where some elements of one game can be explained in the following ones. Speaking about Campbell, GW and Raiden. The imitation of life is emulated not due to the computation power, but because of nanomachines inside Jack's body. All soldiers of New Generation have nanomachines in their bodies. Just like Solid had in the previous part, they protected him from cold, for example.
GW was most likely stimulating cortical activity in the dormant part of your brain through signal manipulation of your own nanomachines. The kernel is, in part, your own creation, cobbled together from expectations and experience.
That's crazy!
But it's probably the truth. The virus may be starting to affect GW, which would explain the kernel's behavior.
And there are no difficulties considering Fortune at all. The Patriots simply equipped her with a device that controls her electromagnetic field behind her back. Thanks to that, all bullets seem to evade her, and she's able to carry a huge gun. So when they needed it, they just performed such a trick. I think it's a true gift to make a script in such a way that you believe less and less people around you in the game. You are not sure what truth and lie is. Almost no one tells the truth, and even if he or she does tell the truth, it's at least not complete. And in the end, a player himself doesn't quite understand what's happening on the screen. The ending of MGS2 is one of the greatest mind twists in the gaming industry in general. A plethora of different themes are intertwined in this game. The idea of censorship of information with the help of right context and content, control of information, reflection considering humans' nature, experience and knowledge about the world. How can you trust the information you hear and see? Is there a chance that everything's being decided for you? How easy can it be to manipulate masses? Can you really trust people around you? I mean, seriously, the last cutscenes last for about half of an hour. The fight with Solidus is not really hard, but you still can't relax there, so the finale hits the brain furiously and stays there for a very, very long time. In general, the game was solved 7 million times. Just like with the previous game, about a year later, another, more complete edition was released with the subhead Substance. Many new things were shown in this version. First of all, tutorial, from which players could learn tips and tricks how to control their characters. It sounds kinda funny to complete the game several times and only after that learn that Raiden still has some tricks up his sleeve. Second of all, survival mode, with fighting bosses, where all bosses appeared on the arena and players had only one health bar. Third of all, there was a casting theater mode, where players could change some models of characters and watch 8 cutscenes with them. Besides, all those VR missions were developed as well. The arenas became more versatile and there were more of them than in the previous part. In addition to that, so-called alternative missions appeared, where in familiar decorations players had to eliminate someone, deactivate a bomb, or just play unnoticed. Another mode called Snake Tales was shown, alternative missions with a small prehistory. Voice actors were not involved here, so these tales can be only read. This game even has skateboarding mode. I mean, why the hell not? This game was also ported to Xbox, PC and PS3. And again, Digital Foundry made some great work in describing all the issues on different platforms. For instance, Xbox version had problems with performance, visual quality and controls. PC port had problems as well. Post-processing systems are used poorly or not used at all. Some textures are seen clearly where they shouldn't be seen. We saw something like this in Silent Hill HD Collection. The usage of keyboard instead of a controller can become really messed up sometimes. So the best way to play this game nowadays is either to play it on PS3 in HD Collection or using the emulation program. It is possible to play this game using PCSX with DualShock 4 connected to PC via DS for Windows or using an Xbox controller. Besides using a widescreen patch, you'll be able to play it almost flawlessly. And of course, Easter eggs. This time developers put some extra thoughts into creation of those. Starting from obvious things like Vulcan Raven statue and posters of police knots and ending with some elements only a few people could find. If you look around and you are not afraid to experiment, you'll be able to find a lot of interesting things.
To come all the way to New York just to get hit with a bowel attack. What luck. Oh. This one's worse than that one up in Alaska.
Also, just like with the previous game, the plot turned into a basis for a comic book that was officially released by Konami in 2005. I should point out that the plot in this comic was different in some places. For example, there are moments with Snake in the center of the plot, not Raiden. Also, there is a book written by Raymond Benson, and unlike the comic book, describes all events just like in the game down to the codec dialogues. It was released in 2009, and I think that's all you should know about it. So let's go down to the whole analysis thing. And this time it may sound more complicated. I, to tell you the truth, cannot point out one theme here. Unlike previous game, this time not just several questions are raised for discussion. This time the game raises a whole layer of thoughts and themes. The theme of memory and how our mind works and develops on the basis of this memory. All in all, these themes are a logical continuation of gene theme that was touched in the previous game. That DNA is not just a sequence of genes that a person got from his or her parents. Memories, just like feelings, play a huge role in the development of a personality, and how important it is to live and accept your past, no matter how dark and cruel it was. Questions like social heritage, information control, influence of this information on people and control of people with this information. I would add the whole ending here and some parts from the middle of the game if I could, but I think it would take too long to watch. The thing of soldiers of a new generation is raised as well. In the previous games, the most efficient way to improve soldiers was gene therapy. Now, it's more complicated, VR trainings. And again, I should remind you that the Patriots failed to create a killing machine out of Raiden, although he's passed through all those tough choices and situations. And while playing the game, you have a feeling that the game plays you. Yes, you play as a secret agent, but because of those lies and spoken words and revealed truth, you feel like the game tries to throw some dust in your eyes, make you believe in what you see and feel, and then twist it upside down. Relationships are also touched much deeper than in the previous game. For example, Rose, Raiden's girlfriend, she's been lying to him all along. At first she was assigned to Raiden to spy on him, but after some time, she really fell in love with him. Or the story of Otacon and his stepsister Emma, maybe even a little bit too Japanese, and the story of Raiden and Rose with all those inconvenient pauses, blame and shame. Some of their dialogues are really touching while she's saving your progress, and sometimes completely out of place. I think it's funny to mention that the way Rose asks Raiden about "Do you remember what day it is tomorrow?" was taken from Kojima's personal experience with his wife that led to some sort of crisis in their relationship. And of course Raiden himself with his story of a boy who had to live through war. It's not a fully fictional problem after all. I mean, yeah, I understand that Raiden is a fictional character, but war in Liberia, children at war and children of wars are very serious topics nowadays, with all those violence, hatred and killing in the world. As we see, Sons of Liberty has become much deeper. It opened a new page in the history of the whole franchise. As I've already told you, the script can be really hard to understand after the first walkthrough, and every person is about to see something personal in it. By the way, this game is still the most commercially successful among all MGS games. I think that's all I wanted to say here. Thank you all for your attention. The following episode is going to be about Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, as you've probably guessed. See you ladies and gents in...
God be with you.